Winter stations have a strange, haunting feel. Not the modern ones, of course, but the old ones that once stood along the Siberian Trail, back when there were no railroads, only sleds heading to the third, toward the endless white expanse. I spent a long time collecting these stories, piece by piece, through travelers' diaries, station keepers' notes, and the memories passed down in families from mouth to mouth. And what's strange is that almost all of these accounts mention the same thing, a peculiar quality to the sleep in winter. It's like falling into another world, deeper than usual, quieter. Perhaps it's the cold or the silence filling the Siberian winter, such silence that it truly blocks your ears. Or maybe it's the fatigue after a long journey, when the body, finally warming up near the stove, immediately yearns for sleep, irresistible in its pull. Or perhaps there's something more to it, a station on the verge of night. Imagine a December, say, 1840-something. The date isn't really important. Winter in Siberia hardly changes from year to year. The same endless white, the same frost that instantly burns your cheeks, the same stars overhead, bright to the point of pain in a clear sky. The station stands, say, between Tomsk and Krasnoyarsk, one of many, roughly every 30 versts. A distance the Troika can cover without overworking the horses. The building is made of thick logs, carefully sealed with moss and tow, because gaps mean death here. The roof is pitched, with snow piled on top in a cap half a meter or more. Small windows to preserve warmth. Wooden shutters close at night and are secured from inside. Smoke always rises from the chimney in winter. The stove never goes out. An unwritten rule of the station, strict and firm. Firewood is gathered in summer, stacked under a shelter by the wall, mostly birch and pine, sometimes larch. Birch burns hotter, pine smoulders longer, while larch acts almost like coal, holding heat for hours. And it's the smell that begins the station's story. Always, the smell hits you when you step in from the cold. Smoke, damp sheepskin, hay, tar, cabbage stew still cooking, horse sweat, leather, tobacco, and something else. An unnameable scent of human life in icy silence. The barn and the first warmth. You go through the door, always the door, never straight from outside, into the entryway. A double door with an air pocket between the cold and warmth. The corridor is nearly always dark, with just a sliver of light from under the inner door. Cold, yes, but not as bitter as outside. Perhaps 10 degrees below freezing, maybe a bit more. It's still early to take off heavy clothing, but already you can breathe deeply without pain in your lungs. Snow is trampled on the floor, frozen into mounds. Along the walls are benches where supplies and tools are stored. Harnesses hang from nails driven into the wood, smelling of frozen leather and tar. In the corner, a broom made from birch branches, worn and battered, used to brush snow off clothes before going inside. I remember reading a description from an official's diary, traveling to Irkutsk on official business. He noted that in the entryway, there was always a long iron poker leaned against the wall near the inner door, and the station keeper told him, "That's not just for show." It was there in case someone knocked during the night, an unfamiliar voice or no voice at all, only knocking. "Don't open right away," the keeper warned. "First ask who's there, then crack the door a little with the poker, then look." "Why?" the official asked. The keeper shrugged. "Frost," he said. "It's a strange thing. Who knows what's wandering about in the cold?" The official chuckled at that. Welcome to Lectures Under the Moon. I'm Daniel Hayes, and today we'll explore the mysterious, the Siberian winter stations. At night, lying on the bunks and hearing the wind howling through the pipe, I no longer laughed. I listened, and each creak of the wooden boards sounded like footsteps in the hallway. The station room, the heart of warmth. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's go back to the moment when the door swings open and you step inside into the heat. The first thing that hits you is the heat, almost unbearable after the cold. The stove is burning so fiercely that your cheeks immediately start to feel like they're burning. Your fingers tingle, blood rushes back into your limbs, and your eyes tear up from the contrast. From the smoke, perhaps a faint haze that always hangs just below the ceiling, like a thin veil, regardless of how well the pipe vents. The room is small, about 5 sajans, maybe less. The ceiling is low. You could touch it with your head if you're tall enough. The floor is made of thick, unpainted boards, darkened over time, polished to a strange, oily shine by boots and felt boots. In the corner, there's always an icon. Usually it's Nicola the Protector, often the patron of travelers. A small lamp flickers before it. The oil is cedar-scented, sweet and fragrant. The stove, the heart of the room, is at the center. Big, made of bricks or stone, covered in white clay. It typically stands in the corner, but so that warmth radiates in all directions. Above, there are wide bunks where people sleep. To the side, a bench where the elderly warm their bones. Below, a firebox where glowing embers smolder steadily, radiating intense heat. I have read that on some stations, especially those in the coldest regions near Yakutsk, further north, the stoves were built in a special way, with intricate internal passages, labyrinths of smoke channels designed to keep the heat in longer. Such a stove could warm the station for an entire day on a single load of wood. They were fueled with tarry firewood, mainly larch. The heat from it was so fierce that the bricks would glow red hot. Always, something was cooking on the stove. A cauldron with broth, a pot of porridge, a kettle boiling water for tea. The smell was strong, hearty, filling the air. After the road, after wind and frost, that aroma was like a promise. Proof that you'd survived, that you'd made it through, that you could finally breathe freely. I remember a description from a station attendant, perhaps from a contemporary account, who wrote that the station keeper was someone who always slept very lightly. Even at night, even in the warmth of the stove, he would hear every sound. The distant chimes, the faint ringing of bells. He would wake up instantly, knowing that a train was coming. A horse neighed in the stable, and he would get up to check. The wind grew stronger, howled higher, and he would go outside to stoke the fire, check the shutters. It wasn't fear that made him do this, but certainty. The station was a responsibility. Not today, but tomorrow, someone would arrive frozen and barely alive, and whether or not they survived depended on how quickly the stove was stoked, how hot the tea was brought to them. There were also station workers, drivers, cooks, laborers. At larger stations, teams of drivers worked together, sometimes 10 or 15 men. They lived in separate rooms or annexes, but gathered in the common room by the stove in the evenings. They played cards, told stories, sipped tea with sugar if they had any, or plain if not. They smoked tobacco, mainly strong, pungent tobacco, stuffed into clay pipes or rolled into cigarettes from newspaper. The smoke hung in a bluish cloud, stinging the eyes, but no one complained. The tobacco warmed from the inside, they said, after frost. That was the best way to settle down for sleep. Strangely, many records mentioned the same ritual, a loose, informal routine, but one repeated with remarkable consistency. Near midnight, around 10 or 11 of the clock, when darkness falls early and dawn comes late in winter, the station keeper would patrol the station. He checked the doors, the shutters, the locks. He stepped outside into the hallway, listening for the wind, whether it was sweeping snow or if it had risen. He looked into the stable, checked on the horses, whether they were calm, whether they were distressed or restless. It was not out of fear but a sense of duty. The station was a weight of responsibility. Someone, at some point, would come in the cold, barely breathing, and the swift action of stoking the fire and serving hot tea could mean the difference between life and death. He would then return, lock the heavy wooden bolt on the door, and approach the stove. Opening the door, he would look at the embers, add another log if needed, then carefully close it before nodding and saying, "You may sleep now." If there were travelers, they would be the first to lie down. The sleeping arrangements followed an unspoken hierarchy. The warmest spot in the room, beneath the ceiling where the heat gathered, was reserved for important officials, merchants, and ladies. If traveling alone, the sick elderly would lie on a bench beside the stove, while others, including tradesmen and common folk accustomed to hardship, would settle along the walls. There were no beds as we understand them. People spread out blankets, sheepskins, collapsing into their clothing. Nobody dared to undress in the cold, not even near the stove. Perhaps the upper shirt was removed, boots and felted shoes stayed on, hats remained on heads, and they wrapped themselves in fur coats, shawls, or whatever else was at hand. Pillows were non-existent. A bag of belongings or a rolled-up coat served as a headrest. Sometimes they simply propped their hand under their head, but I remember everyone falling asleep quickly, almost instantly, like they were sinking into unconsciousness. After the journey, after the frost, after hot borscht and steaming tea, the body demanded sleep so fiercely that resisting was impossible. The sleep was of a particular quality, and here begins the most intriguing part, which compelled me to record these memories, compare, and seek patterns. Nearly everyone who left recollections of overnight stays at winter stations mentions that sleep there was special, not just deep, but different. One traveler, a doctor apparently headed to Tomsk in the 1930s of the 19th century, wrote that he fell asleep at stations in a way he had never experienced anywhere else. He described it as sinking into warm, dark water, as if plunging to the bottom of a deep well where nothing exists but absolute silence and warmth. He woke feeling as if the night had lasted an eternity, rested as if he had slept for a whole week. Another Decemberist, I won't name him because these notes were personal, not for publication, described vivid, almost unnaturally clear dreams he had on the stations. He wrote that it was as if he wasn't sleeping at all, but living another life, parallel to this one. He saw places he had never been to, faces of people he didn't know, heard conversations in languages he couldn't understand, yet somehow the meaning was clear. He would wake up with perfect memory of every detail. Normally, he said, dreams faded within minutes, but here he remembered days, weeks, even months. One woman, the wife of an official traveling into exile with her husband, kept a diary in which she wrote, "I sleep at the stations so soundly that I don't hear anything, neither the snoring of the drovers, nor the creaking of the floorboards, nor the wind howling through the pipe. I fall into complete darkness, and in that darkness there is a silence unlike any on earth. Silence so profound it feels like ringing in the ears, like I am floating in emptiness." And one more strange detail. Many wrote that they woke up at the same time at every station, without alarm clocks or roosters. The cold doesn't wake them. It's simply that they all awaken simultaneously, as if on command, as if by an invisible signal. The station master later explained, "It's the stove. The stove cools to a certain temperature by morning. The body feels it, and it awakens. It makes sense, seemingly. But then, why do even those sleeping right next to the stove in the warm tents wake up at the same moment? The sounds of the night. The silence at the winter station is a relative concept. Absolute silence does not exist. Something is always audible. The stove, for instance. The stove lives its own life. The wood crackles, The embers hiss, and the ash falls with a soft rustling. Occasionally, a pop when a log burns through and crumbles, or a faint hum when the draft increases and the wind rushes into the pipe. The floorboards creak from temperature fluctuations. During the day, the station's structure heats up and expands. At night, it cools and contracts, creaking and groaning quietly, sometimes sharply. This can be especially frightening for those sleeping here for the first time, causing them to jump at sudden noises. The wind, always present in Siberia during winter, may not be a blizzard, but it's always there. It circles around the station, howling in the gaps, whistling beneath the roof's ridge, rustling the snow against the shutters. Sometimes the wind intensifies, causing the walls to tremble slightly, almost imperceptibly, then quiets down to a whisper, barely audible. People are brave, of course. Some snore, others whistle softly through their noses, some mumble in their sleep. They turn and shift, the sheepskin blankets rustling with each movement. Someone gets up in the middle of the night, stomping through the barn, then returning with a sigh of relief. The horses are in the barn. If the station is small and the barn nearby, you can hear them snorting, chewing hay, shifting on their hooves. These sounds are reassuring, lively, real. And yet, there's another sound, one you don't actually hear, but feel. The cold, yes, the cold, has a sound. Perhaps you're not aware of this if you've never lived in Siberia, but everyone there knows. When the temperature drops below 30 or even 40 degrees Fahrenheit, the cold begins to speak. It creaks, squeaks, and cracks. Trees split apart from the frost, and you can hear it from a distance. The sharp snaps are as loud as gunshots. Telegraph poles, those that appeared later in the late 19th century, crack so fiercely that sparks fly from them. Even the air itself seems to hum, a high, barely perceptible ringing, like crystal chimes colliding in the cold. The ice crystals in the atmosphere ring and clash, creating a delicate, almost musical sound. Your breath freezes right in front of your face, producing a noise similar to the rustling of paper. Lying on the bunks, wrapped in sheepskin in the warmth, you can still hear the cold singing its ancient song through the walls. Patient, indifferent, eternal. And as you drift into sleep, it becomes a lullaby for shared dreams. There was another strange detail I found in the records, mentioned only rarely and in passing, yet always there. Sometimes, people at the station dream of similar visions, not identical, but with common elements and images. For example, the forest. Many wrote that they saw a forest in their dreams, not the one outside the window, but an old, dark forest, where trees are so thick and heavy, their trunks 3 times around, that even in daylight it's so shadowy that darkness seems to linger between them. A forest where snow lies untouched, with no footprints, and the silence is so profound that even breathing feels dangerous. And they walk through this forest, not knowing where they're headed or why, just walking endlessly, forever, without tiring, without freezing, like time itself has stopped. Or a river, a wide, frozen river stretching to the horizon. The ice is so clear that you can see the stones and fish beneath, perfectly still in the frozen water. Walking across this ice, looking down at the world beneath, you see a different, halted realm, waiting, frozen in time. In the mornings, people gather around the stove, drinking tea, and someone mentions, "I saw a strange dream, a forest moving." Another nods in agreement. "Yes, I saw an old forest, just like that." It's probably just coincidence. After all, Siberia is surrounded by forests everywhere, so maybe that's why it appears in dreams. It makes sense. But then, why do so many dream of the same forest? Why do all descriptions match so precisely? Trees with 3 times their width, twilight, silence, untouched snow. An old station watchman, one who has spent half his life working in these places, once told a traveler who was surprised by the similarity of the dreams. And why be surprised? This place is special, an ancient track. Who hasn't been here before? And strange things have happened. Maybe these dreams aren't even ours. Maybe we're borrowing them from those who came before us, like worn-out clothes we keep wearing. The traveler chuckled, but the watchman didn't. He only looked out the window at the white road disappearing into the distance, silent. The secret of the station's rooms, these chambers, remains a story of their own. They are almost sacred places, warmest, coziest, and most inaccessible to ordinary people. These rooms hold their own mysteries, their own quiet truths, hidden away from the world outside. Imagine a platform wide above the stove, just beneath the ceiling, about 1.5 meters, maybe 2 meters from the ground. You climb up using a small wooden ladder with notches, or simply by stepping directly onto the stove, grabbing onto the brick ledges. Up top, the heat is intense. The air is thick, heavy, tinged faintly with the smell of smoke and wool. The wooden planks beneath your back are warm, heated all the way through. The ceiling is low, your head nearly touches it, but there's enough space. About 5 or 6 people can sit comfortably. Usually they lie in a haphazard pile, head to feet to save space. They cover themselves with a common sheepskin coat if it's cold, or each has their own. Whatever they have, head to toe. And there you lie, listening to the movement below, the quiet exchanges, the hum of the stove beneath, the wind howling outside, while you're high above, in warmth, in safety, as if on an island in the middle of a cold ocean. You fall asleep, and a special kind of sleep takes over, deep, heavy. It's like sinking into dark, viscous honey, as if the earth pulls you stronger than usual, pressing you against the warm planks, refusing to let go. A traveler once wrote, "I slept on blankets, dreaming I wasn't in the sky, but in some other space. No top, no bottom, only warmth and darkness. Distant voices, indistinct, singing or crying, no one can tell. I woke up soaked in sweat. The heat had been unbearable. I went down, drank cold water from a bucket." The caretaker asked, "Did you sleep well?" I answered, "Yes, but it felt strange." The caretaker nodded. "Always strange," he said. "You get used to it." Tea before sleep. That's another tradition repeated in the records. Tea before bed. Not obligatory, but common. Closer to nightfall, when everyone's settled, the caretaker, or his wife, would set a small samovar on the stove, enough for 3 or 4 glasses. The water boiled quickly. The stove's heat rose in a column. They brewed strong, brick-red tea, usually compressed, cheap, but fragrant. Steeping it for 3 or 4 minutes at most, then pouring into thick, cut-glass glasses or clay mugs, the ones available. They drank slowly, sipping. With sugar if available, without if not, sometimes with honey or jam. On richer stations, they sat quietly with bagels or dry biscuits, mainly listening to the stove, the wind, the creaking of the wood. Some smoked, others dozed sitting upright, holding their mug. And what was strange is that this tea helped them fall asleep, even though it shouldn't. Tea is supposed to invigorate with caffeine. Yet here, it relaxed gently, unobtrusively. A hot glass, then lying down, and sleep would come immediately, smoothly, without resistance. Maybe it was the herbs added. Ivan, tea, oregano, mint. Maybe the warmth inside and out, the body relaxing. Or perhaps the ritual itself, knowing that having drunk tea marked the end of the day, the moment to let go. Or simply exhaustion from the road, from the cold. Any tea seemed soporific after a journey. The stories of the drivers. While drinking tea, they'd tell stories, sometimes frightening, sometimes funny, more often just strange. Stories of wandering lights that appeared out of nowhere and vanished into nothingness. About flickering flames in the fields that beckoned, drew travelers into thickets or marshes. About voices calling by name from the darkness, familiar voices of mothers, wives, friends. But approaching was forbidden. They knew better, because it wasn't really their mother or wife, but something else, pretending. About horses stopping in the middle of the road and refusing to move, standing trembling, snorting. Then, in a minute, a landslide from a mountain, a snowdrift, or a tree falling right onto the road, like they sensed it. About stations where the caretakers disappeared. They'd arrive in the morning, the station would be open, the stove lit, hot tea on the table, but the caretaker gone. Neither in the room, nor in the hallway, nor in the barn. No traces led anywhere, as if right through the ground. "Did anyone find anything?" someone asked. "Sometimes," replied the coachman, "in spring, when the snow melted, in the forest, about 3 versts from the station, he would sit under a tree, frozen, with a peaceful face, as if asleep. Who knows why he left? No one could say." The silence after such a story was heavy. You could hear the ashes in the stove falling, the wind whistling through the cracks. Someone crossed themselves quietly. Someone spat over their shoulder. An old superstition, from trouble. Then someone else would start telling something lighter, funnier, about how a landowner from the city came in winter, saw the frost, got so frightened he sat inside the station for 3 days, afraid to leave. Or about a merchant who put on felt boots for the first time, walking like he was on stilts, falling every 5 steps. They laughed softly, but with full heart. Fear dissolved in laughter, in warmth, in the fatigue that was coming on. And gradually, one after another, they fell silent, lowered their heads to their chests, slumped onto benches or the floor, covered themselves with whatever they had, and fell asleep. The last was the overseer. He walked around once more, checking the doors, windows, and the stove. He extinguished the lamp before the icon, leaving only a tiny, flickering flame. He lay down on the bedroll near the stove, closer to the door, so he could hear if anything happened, and fell asleep too. But he was always alert, always listening carefully. Midway through the night, there was a time in the dead of winter's night, the most silent part. Not the beginning, when it's not fully dark yet, nor the end, when dawn begins to break. The middle, the dead center. In the city, this is around 3 or 4 in the morning. Usually here, at the stations, time flowed differently. Nearly no one had clocks. They relied on feeling, how the stove cooled, how the silence became special, almost absolute. During this time, everyone slept the deepest. Even the overseer, even the horses in the stable didn't stir. It was as if the world was holding its breath, waiting for something. One merchant, I read his notes, published many years later, described how he woke up once at this time without any reason, just opened his eyes, and immediately understood that it was still night, that he should sleep more, but couldn't fall back asleep. He lay there, listening. The silence was so profound it blocked out his ears. No sound at all, not even the wind or the crackling of the stove. And in that silence, he heard something from outside. Not a sound, more like a sensation of sound, like someone walking far away in the snow, slowly, evenly. Step, step, step. He listened closely. It disappeared. Maybe he imagined it? He closed his eyes. Again, Steps. Closer now. Clearer. He opened his eyes. Silence. He moved slightly. Someone else in the tents shifted too. Whispered, "Do you hear it too?" "Yes," the merchant replied. "I hear it." "What is it?" "I don't know." They lay there, listening. The footsteps continued, approaching the station, circling around slowly as if someone was examining the building, studying it. Then they stopped at the door. Silence. The merchant's heart was pounding so loudly it seemed everyone could hear it. Suddenly, a knock at the door. 3 times. Softly, almost politely. The overseer jerked upright on his bedroll, sat up, listening. The knock repeated 3 times. Same tone, if a knock can have tone. Insistent, but not aggressive. The overseer stood, threw on his coat, grabbed the poker from the wall, and approached the door. "Who's there?" he asked quietly. Silence. "Who's there?" Louder. Again, silence. The overseer stood there, hand on the latch, poker in the other hand. "Don't open," someone from the darkness whispered. "Don't open at night if they don't answer." The overseer nodded, knowing what was meant. He stepped back from the door, returned to his bedroll, but didn't lie down. He sat and waited. No more knocking, no footsteps, as if whoever was outside had left or vanished. In the morning they went out to look. No traces at all. None. The snow was smooth, untouched all around the station. "Maybe it was the wind," said the overseer. The snowstorm was beginning to settle. It seemed so. The trader did not argue, but in his notes he recorded, "It could not appear to 3 people at once. Everyone heard it. What was that? I don't know. I don't want to know." The overseer's dream. There were some among the overseers who spoke of extraordinary dreams, not just vivid, but almost prophetic. One said he dreamt that a specific troika was coming. He saw the horses' coats, the harnesses, the driver's face, his beard, his sheepskin coat. And he knew that this troika would definitely arrive tomorrow or the day after. He wakes up, remembers every detail, waits. And sure enough, in a day or two, the troika arrives. The same horses of that breed, the same driver, exactly as he saw. It could be coincidence, but when it repeats over and over, doubts begin to creep in. Or you dream that someone will get lost, a specific person. You see them in the dream, walking across a field, circling, then falling. You wake with a feeling of unease. Tell the others, "Be more careful today. Maybe someone's on the road." And in the distance, they find a person barely alive, buried up to the chest in snowdrift, exactly as seen in the dream. "That's a gift," the elders would say. "The place gives it, the old trail, blessed and well-worn. So many people have passed through, so many fates intertwined. Maybe some kind of information is floating in the air. Sensitive people pick up on it, especially in dreams, when defenses are down, when consciousness is open. Or maybe it's just experience. You know, when a snowstorm is coming, you dream that someone will get lost. It makes sense. You dream of a trading caravan coming from the north, that a troika will arrive. That also makes sense, yet it still feels strange. Why do certain details appear in dreams? Faces. Why do we see those we don't know? I don't know. No one knew. The smells that haunted dreams, another detail many mentioned, were vivid, memorable after waking. The scent of smoke, but not from the stove, perhaps from another fire, or burning wood from a forest, resinous and thick. The smell of summer grass, warmed by the sun. even though outside was winter, cold, snow up to your chest. But in the dream, grass. You feel how it smells. You wake up, and for a few seconds, perhaps 3 or 4, you still sense it. Then it fades away. The scent of water, rivers, lakes, fresh, pure, with a faint taste of silt. The smell of warm bread, just out of the oven, with a crust crisp and fragrant. These scents were mostly comforting, soothing, like someone cared to make the dreams gentle, the rest complete. But sometimes they were different. The smell of decay, dampness, cold that wasn't from the frost, but from something deeper, older. Those dreams people didn't like to remember. They woke up feeling nauseous, with a sticky, anxious dread, trying to forget as quickly as possible. In such cases, the overseers advised saying a prayer before sleep, opening a window for a minute, airing out the room, or simply not eating late at night. Maybe the heaviness in the stomach caused bad dreams. Who knows if it helped? Still, the ritual was calming, and peace before sleep was half the battle. On the station, during a full moon, nights were especially remarkable. When the moon was full, hanging over the taiga, enormous and nearly yellow, its light fell on the snow so brightly that you could read without a candle. On such nights, the snow sparkled like it was studded with diamonds. Shadows from trees stretched sharp, black, and long. Everything looked like a painted scene, white and black, with no in-between shades. At the stations, full moons disturbed sleep. Everyone agreed that sleep was shallow and restless. Dreams were troubled. You woke up often, without reason. The horses also became restless, neighing, snorting, shifting in their stalls. The dogs howled, not at the moon, but toward the forest, as if they saw something there. During such nights, the overseers hardly slept at all. They sat by the window, watching, alert for any sign. Something told them, stay vigilant, stay on the lookout. What could have happened? An attack? Wolves? Bandits? I don't know. The records don't specify. We just waited, kept watch, and by morning, when the moon was setting and the sky was turning bright in the east, the tension would ease. Then we could breathe again. Nothing had happened. It passed until the next full moon. Dreams of an endless road. There was one dream that recurred so often among many that it even earned an unofficial name, the road dream. You dream that you are walking or riding, it doesn't matter, on a white, straight, endless road. No scenery on the sides, either a white field or a distant forest on the horizon, the sky gray and low. And you walk for a very long time. You get tired, but you can't stop, because if you do, you'll freeze. You know this in the dream. You know it for certain. You look back, and behind you is also a road stretching to the horizon. Your tracks are gone. The snow is pristine. You look ahead, and the road remains the same. Nothing changes. Suddenly, you realize you've been walking forever. Maybe days, maybe years. Time seems to vanish. There's only the road, and you, and the movement that never stops. When you wake up, your legs ache, really ache, as if you've truly been walking, exhausted. What is this? People would ask the overseers. Just a dream about the road, they'd reply. It's a trail. It gets into your head. Everyone who rides sees it. That's normal. But why does everyone see the same thing? The same road, so they see the same. The logic is strange, but there was no other. Sometimes the sounds would wake us. Rarely, but it happened. People would wake up from a specific sound that wasn't there, like a bell. They'd hear a loud, clear ringing, as if the bell tower was right next to them. But there were no bell towers at the stations. Churches were few and far, about 10 or 15 miles away from the stations, and they certainly didn't ring in the middle of the night. Yet the bell sound would be there. People would wake, look around, and find others already awake. Silence then. Maybe it was just their imagination, but why then did several people wake up at the same time? Or sometimes it was a distant, unclear singing, like a choir, many voices blending into one sound. Beautiful, regal, yet somehow unsettling. It would last only seconds, then silence again. People would cross themselves, whisper prayers, try to fall back asleep. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. In the morning, they'd ask the overseer if he had heard anything. He would shake his head. "Nothing," he'd say. "I slept soundly." "Maybe it was the wind," he'd suggest. "Wailing in the pipe," he'd add. "It sounds like singing sometimes." "Maybe," he'd say. But why was it so vivid, so human? "I don't know," the overseer would admit. "A lot of strange things happen in the taiga. Not everything can be explained." Morning at the station. Nearly everyone would wake up at once as the light began to seep through the cracks in the shutters. Not dawn yet, but the night had passed into a gray, transitional time. People stretched, groaned, their backs stiff, sides aching, necks stiff and unresponsive. That's normal. After a night spent on the floor or on a hard bench, the body will stiffen. The overseer was already on his feet. The fire was already burning. Smoke rose from the pipe. The room warmed quickly. The water in the stove started boiling. Tea steeped. They opened the shutters, and bright white light flooded in, sharp and almost painful to the eyes. Outside, the snow sparkled. The sky was clear and cold, promising a bright, chilly day. People washed with snow, stepped into the porch, scooped up a handful and rubbed it on their faces. It stings, but invigorates. Sleep was finally completely gone. Breakfast was quick, yesterday's broth reheated, bread, maybe some lard, and strong hot tea poured by the mugful. They washed down the cold that still awaited outside. They gathered, checked their gear, and prepared to leave. The drivers saddled the horses and hitched them up. The horses snorted, shook off snow, and steam billowed from their nostrils. Then they headed into the endless white landscape along the road that had haunted their dreams last night. A road that never ends. The overseer watched them leave, then turned back into the room, tidied up, and got ready for the next visitors expected in the evening or during the night. They would surely come, because the road was never empty. The stations were never truly empty. They carried the memory of those who had passed through. There was a time during the coldest, snowstorm-racked winters when stations would fall silent for days. No one traveled then. Caravans would halt, waiting for better weather. Solo travelers would not risk the journey, leaving the station alone with silence. The station master would tend to the stove, cook meals for himself and his family, feed the horses, and gaze out at the blizzard, waiting patiently. Some say that during these days when no one was around, when only the family remained, the station would begin to speak not with words, but with sounds. The floorboards in empty rooms would creak, shutters would bang even though they were locked. Whispers would drift through the pipes despite the absence of wind. It was like the station remembered everyone who had been there, every voice, every step, every sigh. In the silence, it would quietly replay these memories for itself. Creepy, perhaps, but also familiar. The station keepers knew that the station was alive. Not literally, but in some other way. It was infused with the life of many people. Warmth, fear, hope, exhaustion. And this essence was stored inside the walls, in the timber, in the bricks of the stove. Sometimes it let a little of that out when no one was around, when it was safe to do so. There was no need to fear, only to understand and respect. Then, the station would guard you as well when your turn came. The last night before reaching the city. There was a tradition among long-distance travelers. Before the final station, the one just before the big city, before the end of the road, they would sleep especially alert and remember their dreams, because dreams at the last station were believed to be prophetic. It was said they would reveal what awaited in the city, an encounter, a separation, luck, or misfortune. People believed in it differently, some seriously, others just as a superstition, but everyone remembered. And many later recounted, "I dreamed of this, and it happened exactly as I saw." They would dream of an unfamiliar person, meet them on the second day, or dream of news, receive a letter. Sometimes they'd dream of a fall, slipping on ice, or twisting an ankle. Perhaps coincidence or self-fulfilling prophecy. If you expected something, unconsciously you moved toward it, and it came true. Still, perhaps there is truth in those borderlands between the road and home, between movement and stillness, between sleep and waking. Maybe the boundary thins there. Maybe what's normally hidden becomes visible. Who knows how children fall asleep? On stations, there were children, families of station workers, children of teamsters, rarely children of travelers if a family was moving. Children fell asleep differently, faster, deeper, and more peacefully than adults. They were laid by the stove, on a cot, in the warmest spot. Covered with sheepskin coats or blankets, they would drift off in an instant, sometimes falling silent mid-sentence, and sleep quietly, not tossing or crying out. Their breathing would be even, deep, peaceful. Adults envied that. How easy it would be, free from worries, heavy dreams, or waking in the middle of the night. But they knew childhood passes, worries come, and sleep becomes more sensitive. That's the price of growing up, of gaining knowledge, of memory. Children don't remember or understand everything yet, so they sleep soundly while they can. Sending someone off on a journey, in the morning before departure, the station master would sometimes speak words like, "Not always, not to everyone." But if he saw that a person was traveling for a long distance or facing a tough road ahead, he would say simple words, wishes. May the road be smooth. May the frost not rage. May the horses not stumble. And may you return safely, if you can. Not a prayer, not a spell, just the words of someone who lived here, who knew the road, who had seen much. Strangely enough, many said those words helped in the blizzard, in the cold. When despair crept in, they would remember. Come back alive. And they would make it. Perhaps the power was in those words, or in the belief that someone wished them well sincerely, without calculation. Maybe it was simply support, a psychological anchor, a reassurance that they were not alone, that they were remembered. And somehow, that belief made the difference. The road is long, cold, risky, but still passable. If you remember, if you trust, if someone wished you a smooth journey. Such were the nights at the winter postal stations of Siberia. I've gathered these stories over a long time, piecing them together like a puzzle. Maybe some details are exaggerated, perhaps others forgotten, but the truth remains at the core. People slept there especially deeply and warmly, with a peaceful feeling, despite the freezing cold and darkness outside. Because a station is an island in an ocean of cold, where one can stop, warm up, and breathe easy. Sleep there is a gift after traveling, before the next trip. A sleep remembered for a long time, sometimes for a whole lifetime. Those who stayed behind were among travelers, Those who did not leave arrived at the station and stayed forever. Not from death, I say, though that sometimes happened. Someone froze along the way, was barely alive when brought in, and was not taken further. They buried such people near the station, placing a wooden cross at their graves. By spring the cross was bowed, and by autumn it had fallen. After a year, there was no trace left. But there were others, still alive, who simply chose to remain. Someone would arrive, spend the night, and the next morning plan to leave again. But then stay. They'd look at the white road stretching away into the distance, at the station, at the smoke rising from the chimney, at the station master in the doorway, and say, "You know, I think I'll stay another day, just to wait out the weather." The weather was clear. The day passed, and again in the evening. "Tomorrow I will leave, I swear, tomorrow for sure." A week went by, then a month, and the person simply stayed at the station, helping with chores, chopping firewood, clearing snow, feeding the horses, not for pay, just as if it were their own affair. The station master didn't chase them away. Extra hands are always needed, and no one asked for compensation for staying overnight. If a person works, they're earning their keep. That was how some lived for years. Come spring, they'd say, "In spring, I'll leave." But spring came, and they delayed until autumn. Then autumn turned into winter. Winter? What kind of winter? The blizzards. They would wait for those to pass. And some never left at all. Why? Sometimes people asked. What keeps them here? They shrugged their shoulders. I don't know. They got used to it. It's good here. Quiet. Warm in winter. In summer there's plenty of work, but not exhausting. People pass through, and there's someone to talk to. But where would they go? Why bother? Perhaps there is something in the rhythm of station life. Simply familiar, repetitive. Wake up, stoke the stove, feed the horses, meet travelers, see them off, have dinner, and fall asleep. The same routine the next day. No worries, no ambitions, no race. Just a measured life, as natural as breathing. Falling asleep in such life comes easily. Maybe that's why women stayed behind. At stations, women were few. Wives of station masters, daughters. Occasionally there were cooks hired at larger stations. Life was hard. Their work was no easier than the men's. Cooking, washing, cleaning, caring for livestock and the garden in summer. Plus, there were the travelers. Feeding them, warming them, making beds. Everything was on the women's shoulders. Yet, strangely, they slept deeply, rarely complaining about insomnia or bad dreams. They fell asleep quickly and woke up refreshed. Perhaps because they were physically exhausted. The body demanded rest, and it received it, rewarding them with deep sleep. Or maybe women simply sleep differently, alert on one side, able to hear if a child cries or if someone calls, but deeply unconscious on the other, when they know they are safe and secure. On the stations, safety was a given. Men nearby, doors bolted, the stove kept burning, wolves didn't dare approach, and the dwellings were protected. There were always plenty of people at the station. Raiders were dangerous to mess with. People could sleep peacefully, and they did. One woman, the wife of the station master near Tomsk, kept a diary. A few entries have survived. In one, she wrote, "I fall asleep each evening with gratitude. For the warmth, for my husband being near, for our children's health, for having lived to see the evening. Tomorrow will be a new day." Please like and subscribe to Lectures Under the Moon for more fascinating stories. We will manage it. For now, sleep. Simple words, but they contain everything. Philosophy of survival, gratitude for the small things, for the day that has passed, for a quiet night ahead. Perhaps that was the secret all along. Not in the station, nor in the stove, nor in the cold, but in gratitude. The dogs which did not sleep. At stations, dogs were always kept, not indoor pets, but yard dogs, working dogs, usually huskies, sometimes mixed breeds of unclear origin. The dogs lived in the entryways, in the stables, in outbuildings. In winter, they sometimes climbed onto the stove, if allowed. They lay curled up in a ball, kept warm, but they always slept alertly. One ear was always on guard. Any slightest sound would make their head lift. Their eyes would open, shining in the darkness. At night, when everyone else was asleep, the dogs kept watch. Not by command, but instinctively. They lay by the door, listening, sometimes jumping up, growling. To the emptiness, it seemed there was no one in the entryway. Outside, it was silent, but the dogs growled nonetheless. Their fur bristled, eyes tense, fixed on a single point. Then they would calm down, lie back down, but they would stay alert for a long time, guarding. What did they sense? Perhaps wolves or distant strangers, or something else entirely, something humans could not perceive, but dogs could. Do we trust dogs? If a dog is restless, it means there is a reason. Maybe it's unseen, unclear, but it exists. So, when a dog growled at night, we did not sleep. We listened and stayed alert, just in case. We never regretted it. The moon and dreams. During the full moon, I used to say, sleeping was worse. But it was not just worse. It was different. Dreams during a full moon were vivid, almost in color, even though most people see dreams in black and white or gray. Here, the colors were bright, saturated, sometimes impossible, colors that do not exist in reality. The scenes were strange, not everyday, fantastical flights, transformations, journeys to incredible places, encounters with beings that were neither human nor animal, something in between or entirely different. We would wake up and remembering for a long time, telling each other about it over tea in the morning, amazed at the coincidences. One saw a huge city made of white stone. Another did too. A third one also. Yet they had not spoken about these dreams to each other before sleeping. The city was always the same, with tall towers, bridges over chasms, and for some reason, the sky was green, not blue. Green. Where could such a city exist? No one knew. Neither Tomsk, nor Krasnoyarsk, nor Irkutsk. It did not resemble anything familiar. Maybe it came from books? Perhaps someone read a description, remembered it, and recreated it in their dreams, passing it on to others. But many could not read it all, and still saw the same thing. A mystery, one of many. These were stories that could not be shared. There were forbidden topics. Officially, no one ever ordered silence, but everyone knew. Not to speak of the missing people, especially not in front of children, women, or before sleep. Those who disappeared into a blizzard and never returned. Those who left one station and did not arrive at the next. Somewhere between the endless white snow, they simply vanished. Sometimes their bodies were found in spring, thawed in a snowdrift, in the woods, in a trench, or not found at all, as if they had never been there. About them, people would either stay silent or whisper quietly, then immediately change the subject. They never spoke about the voices calling from the darkness, calling by the names of loved ones or familiar voices. "Ivan, help!" Or a wife's voice exactly as it sounded, or, "Peter, where are you?" The voice of a mother, impossible to distinguish. But no one could go toward them. Everyone knew these voices were not really the wife or mother. They were something else, something that lures. Why, no one understood, but it was never anything good. Those who followed these voices never came back. That was also a secret everyone kept. People kept silent about the heavy dreams as well. When you dream that you are suffocating, that something presses on your chest, that you cannot wake up, you scream, but no sound comes out. You move, but your body does not obey. Old-timers used to say that a house spirit suffocates, or perhaps a kikimora. Before sleep, prayers had to be recited, a cross kept on the chest. Sometimes it helped, but talking about it aloud only risked tempting fate. So people kept quiet, and the night passed silently. Maybe that's why silence reigned, just like when waking in a snowstorm. The storm could begin suddenly at night. The evening was calm. By midnight, the wind rose. By dawn, it howled so fiercely that the walls trembled. We'd wake up to the noise, howling, crashing, even when the doors were locked. Snow scraped along the roof and walls, forcing us to open our eyes into darkness. The fire was barely flickering, the cold creeping in. Not yet severe, but noticeable. The air shifted. Someone would get up, usually the overseer, but not only him, and head to the stove. He'd add logs, tend the embers, and the flames would flare up, casting a warm yellow glow that spread through the room. The others would wake, wrapped in blankets, watching the fire, silent, listening to the snowstorm. There was something primal in that, sitting by the fire while a storm raged outside, feeling warmth on the face and hands, knowing inside was safe. As the stove was fed, we'd brew tea, drink silently, and linger before lying back down. We'd sit, stare into the flames. The fire hypnotized us. The tongues of flame danced, changed, never the same. You could stare endlessly and see faces, figures, stories in them. Gradually, one by one, we'd drift back to sleep, sometimes sitting upright. Heads would fall onto chests, someone would gently settle and cover them, and sleep would take over again. Under the storm's howling, the crackling stove, and the certainty that on this warm island nothing would happen, so long as there was fire and logs. Old stations and new. By the end of the 10th century, stations began changing. Railroads were built, the trail lost importance. Caravans ran less frequently. Stations emptied out, some closed. Overseers were reassigned, buildings abandoned. In a year or two, they fell into ruin. Snow-covered roofs, walls rotting, structures collapsing. Travelers passing by saw the ruins, remembered perhaps that they once stayed here. It was warm then, with hot stews, and the overseer was unwelcoming. Now, it's all emptiness. Windows shattered, doors torn away, the wind wandering inside, snow piling into rooms where people once slept. The stove stands, partially fallen, bricks crumbling, but the heart of the station is now cold and dead. It's sad, as if time itself was dying, the era passing. No more nights like those, no more stations, no more sleep like that. Progress is good. Railways are faster, more comfortable, safer. The carriage is warmer than a sledge, hot food, a clean bed. But something is lost. A subtle connection with the road, with space, with winter's silence. In the train, you sleep differently. It sways, wheels clatter, stops are frequent. People move about, talk, make noise. It's not the same depth, the same immersion. The old folks said it used to be better. Maybe nostalgia or idealization of the past. Or perhaps in some ways it really was better. How we fell asleep at stations, woke up, remembered dreams. That's gone now. The last few stations operated until the early 20th century, even before the revolution. The trail didn't die completely. Some places still hadn't seen the railroad. There, everything remained as before. Fires were still lit, travelers still arrived, overseers still met them. Only less often, more quietly. The final record of someone sleeping at a station was probably from the year 913, when someone wrote, "Strange feeling. The station is old, dilapidated. The overseer looks ancient, probably around 50. He lives alone. The children left for the city. The wife died. The stove is kept burning, soup is simmering on the stove, and it waits for guests who rarely come." I was alone that night. Only I and he lay on the cots, listening to the silence. Such silence, something you could never hear in the city. And I dreamed that I stood on the road, looking at the station, but it wasn't illuminated in any physical way. It was as if inside it there was a warm, living light, and all around was darkness, full and heavy, cold emptiness. And the station was the only thing holding back that emptiness, preventing it from swallowing everything. I woke up and went to the window. Dawn was beginning. The snow was pink in the rays of the sun, and the road was empty. And I thought, soon there will be no more stations, no more roads, no more of this old world. Only memories will remain, if luck is on our side. Why am I telling you this? It's been 100 years since those times, more. The stations are gone, the old roads abandoned. Somewhere they paved over them with asphalt, in others villages have grown, and in still others the forest has reclaimed the land, overgrowing the roads. But I gather these stories, I read diaries, notes, memories, and I piece them together, because it's important to remember how people used to fall asleep when there was no electricity, no telephones, no comfortable cars with heating. They simply dozed off by the stove, in the warmth created by their own hands, after cooking a meal they prepared themselves, in the safety they built together. They slept deeply and peacefully, with dreams they remembered. Perhaps we should try to bring some of that back, not literally the stove or the station, but the ritual of falling asleep, the gratitude for warmth, for safety, for silence. Turning off the phone, extinguishing unnecessary lights, sitting in darkness, listening to the quiet, and falling asleep simply, without worries, without replaying the day or planning tomorrow. Falling asleep as they did on the stations, trusting that the night would pass, that morning would come, and that everything would be all right. Frost patterns on the windows. In the morning, when waking, the first things seen were the patterns on the glass. If the night had been particularly cold, the frost would paint the windows so densely that little light could penetrate. Only silhouettes, shadows, hints of the outside world. The patterns were different every time. Feathers, leaves, flowers unseen, fairy tale forests. Nature was drawing. Water froze on the glass. Crystals of ice grew according to their own laws, forming compositions that no artist could ever duplicate. If children were at the station, they could watch these patterns for hours, tracing the contours with their fingers without touching, imagining stories, here a dragon, there a castle, a princess in a tower. Adults looked at the same patterns and saw something entirely different. A map of the roads they would travel, or simply pure, meaningless beauty. A reminder that this world is harsh, yes. But even within that harshness lies its own magic, its own art, revealed only in the cold, when the temperature drops so low that water vapor freezes directly onto the glass, transforming into intricate, fantastical crystals. By midday, when the room warmed up from the stove, which had been heated fiercely, and the glass gradually grew warm, the patterns began to melt. First along the edges, where the frost was thinnest, then toward the center, turning into drops of water that trickled down in slow streams, leaving behind a clear surface through which the white road, the snow-covered forest, and the gray or blue sky, depending on the weather, could be seen. By evening, when the sun set and the frost hardened again, the glass was perfectly clear and transparent. You could look up at the bright stars, so numerous that they filled the sky in a way no city dweller could imagine. The Milky Way was visible so vividly it seemed painted, and individual stars shone with such intensity that it felt like you could reach out and pluck one from the sky. Friends, a small request. Support Lectures Under the Moon with a like. It helps the channel grow. On the following night, if the cold did not weaken but instead intensified, as often happened in January or February when temperatures dropped so low that breath immediately froze and turned into frost on the collar, the patterns of ice crystals would return, always new and different. No two formations could be exactly alike, each with its own shape, its own path, its own story of freezing. People would fall asleep knowing that in the morning they would see something beautiful and unique on the window, a design painted by frost, created especially for those warm, safe, and sheltered inside, for those who had survived the night and deserved to witness this beauty. A small reward for endurance, for perseverance, for holding on until dawn. The temperature inside the station and its fluctuations raise an intriguing question. What was the actual temperature in different parts of the room, and how did it change from evening to morning? I found mentions of this in various records, though no precise measurements were ever made because thermometers were rare. Instead, people described their sensations, allowing us to form a rough picture of how heat was distributed within the station room. Near the stove, at a distance of about 1 meter from its heated sides, it was so hot that standing there for long was impossible. Probably around 30 degrees Celsius, maybe more. The hand couldn't withstand touching the bricks, which heated up so much they glowed nearly red in the darkness. The air around the stove shimmered from the rising heat, forming an invisible column that could be felt but not seen. Above the stove, near the ceiling, where the warm air accumulated because warm air is lighter than cold and naturally rises upward, the temperature was roughly 25 degrees Celsius. That was a comfortable warmth. People could sleep without outer clothing, just in their undershirts. Sometimes they would unbutton their shirts at the collar if it became too hot. In the center of the room, where the table and benches stood, where people sat in the evening drinking tea, the temperature ranged from about 18 to 20 degrees Celsius. Quite comfortable for sitting still. Not cold, but not hot either. A temperature that allows the body to relax without expending energy on heating or cooling. In the corners of the room, along the walls farthest from the stove, especially on the wall facing north or the direction of the wind, the temperature dropped to around 10 or 12 degrees Celsius. It was noticeably chilly. One would need warm clothing if staying still for a long time. Breathing may not have been visibly frosty yet, but a person could start to feel numbness if they lingered too long in such a corner. Near the door, in that part of the room closer to the storage sheds, the temperature was even lower, around 8 degrees Celsius. It was truly cold there. People deliberately avoided sitting in that area if possible, and in the storage sheds themselves, this intermediate space between the outside cold and the warmth of the main room, the area between the frost outside and the heated interior, temperatures hovered around 0 or just above. Not as deadly as the cold outdoors, but still uncomfortable for extended stays. Beyond the wall, just half a meter away, behind logs sealed with moss and tar paper, the frost was relentless, with outside temperatures often dropping to 30 or 40 degrees below 0, and during particularly cold nights, happening several times each winter, the temperature could fall to 50 below or even lower. Such cold made metal brittle as glass, and wood crack with a sharp, gunshot-like sound. Any living creature caught outside without protection would die within minutes from frostbite incompatible with life. The temperature difference was staggering, a separation of 70 degrees Celsius within just a few meters from the stove's blazing heat, which could cause burns and scalds, to the deadly cold that could kill in moments. An invisible line between warmth and lethal frost. It was a harsh reminder of the brutal power of winter's grip, where the very air was a battleground of life and death, and survival depended on understanding and respecting these extreme boundaries. And this difference was felt physically by everyone at the station. The body understood on some deep, instinctive level that life was concentrated near the fireplace, in the warmth, while beyond the door, beyond the wall, in the white emptiness of snow, death reigned in the most literal sense, without metaphor or exaggeration. People fell asleep with this profound, instinctive awareness, with gratitude towards the stove that burned and provided heat. Gratitude for the firewood, gathered during the summer when the weather was warm and work was possible. Gratitude for the person who chopped, stacked, and dried the logs, for the one now watching over the fire to make sure it didn't go out, for the thick walls that held the heat inside and kept the cold from seeping in. They slept with this understanding deep in their subconscious, knowing that as long as the stove burned, as long as the embers smoldered and the heat emanated from the bricks, nothing was truly dangerous. Control could be relaxed, sleep could be deep, because the station protected them, the warmth was preserved, and morning would come, allowing them to wake up alive and unharmed. The rhythm of breathing among the sleeping, the overall synchronization, within the room where 10, maybe 15 people, or even more if the station was busy and travelers were many, gradually established a special rhythm. A collective breathing rhythm that merged into one, like an orchestra tuning up before a symphony begins. At first, immediately after everyone had settled into their places and wrapped themselves in whatever was available, whether a blanket, a coat, or just a piece of cloth, their breathing was varied. Some breathed quickly and excitedly, still restless from the long journey, from the cold, from the day's impressions. Others exhaled slowly and heavily, as if they were very exhausted, having just arrived, their bodies craving immediate rest. Some snorted or whistled through their noses, others sighed deeply and with length. But gradually, after about 10 or 15 minutes, once the last lamps were extinguished, leaving only a small lamp before the icon and the faint glow of embers in the stove, this breathing rhythm began to even out. Not completely, of course, not in perfect unison like a choir singing, yet it was noticeable and clear. Those who listened closely could hear how their scattered breaths started to adapt to each other, to synchronize on some subconscious level. People began breathing more slowly than before, more deeply, more evenly. Their inhales and exhales grew smoother and more measured. Although each retained their individual rhythm in broad strokes, it was still perceptible that the breathing in the room grew more coordinated, more unified. And those who were not yet asleep, lying there listening to this symphony of shared breathing, were filled with a kind of wonder, as a child is enchanted by the sound of the sea or the rain. Inhale, exhale. Inhale, exhale. This constant, measured repetition acted like a mantra, like a lullaby, like a spell that lulled into sleep. Perhaps there was something evolutionary and ancient in it, something handed down from distant ancestors who slept together in caves, not only for warmth, but for safety, when the synchronization of breathing created an invisible bond among the members of a tribe, when each person sensed the presence of others and knew they were not alone, protected, and that if danger approached, someone would hear and raise the alarm. Something similar happened on the station, though the threat was different. Not predators or enemies, but the cold, the snowstorm and loneliness, endless in the white desert. Yet the mechanism was the same. Strangers, gathered by chance under one roof for a single night, became almost family for a while, bound by this shared breathing, this common warmth, this collective sleep that gradually enveloped everyone. And if someone shouted in their sleep or began to gasp, as happens during a nightmare, the others could feel this change in the overall rhythm. They wouldn't necessarily wake up, but they would shift restlessly, change their position, perhaps mumble something unintelligible until the person in distress calmed down and their breathing returned to the collective pace. Care was unconscious, instinctive. No one made a decision to care for others. Bodies simply responded to shifts in the shared atmosphere, to a disruption in the harmony of breathing. Bodies communicated without words, saying, "We are together. We survive together while asleep. We are one entity, a single organism breathing in unison. If one part suffers, the whole suffers. And it's crucial to restore balance, to bring back harmony so everyone can sleep peacefully until dawn." Dreams of a distant home and the memory of the heart. Many people at these remote stations, torn from their homes for weeks or even months of travel, would see dreams of home, of the place they left behind or the place ahead, waiting at the end of a long, arduous road. The home in their dreams was always warm, even if in reality it was cold, poor, and uncomfortable, even if life there was hard and hunger gnawed at them. In sleep, it transformed into the perfect embodiment of comfort and safety. The fireplace in Tom's house was large and always glowing with heat, constantly stoked. The table was set with every kind of food. The family sat around it, father, mother, wife, children, brothers, sisters, and everyone smiled, waiting, reaching out their hands to invite others to sit, to share the meal, to talk about the journey. People woke up with this feeling of warmth, home, and love, which still warmed their soul for a few minutes after awakening. They rose from their beds light-hearted despite physical fatigue, because they knew that home was ahead, that it was waiting, that all they had to do was reach it, travel to it, endure until they arrived, and then there would be a reunion, embraces, a return to that space where they belonged, where they were known and loved. Maybe that reunion would happen in a week, maybe in a month, or perhaps in 3 months if the road was long and difficult. But the home was there. It hadn't disappeared. It stood waiting. And this certainty gave them strength to keep moving forward. For some, the dream of home was their final one. Not everyone reached the end of the journey. Some froze along the way, caught in an unexpected snowstorm. Others died from an illness that struck them down within days. Some perished in accidents that were tragic, absurd, and inevitable. Yet, they died with this dream in their hearts, in sleep, already at home, warm, surrounded by loved ones. Perhaps it was some mercy of nature or divine grace, I don't know whom, but I am not the judge. The last thing a person sees before death should not be the deadly cold or the blinding snowstorm, nor the terrifying loneliness of the white desert, but the home. Always the home. Warm, bright, full of love. The smell of different kinds of firewood and its influence on dreams. At the stations, different woods were used depending on what grew locally and what could be gathered during summer, and they smelled differently. Surprisingly, this smell affected dreams. One might think there's no connection between the type of wood burning in the stove and the content of the dreams the sleepers in the same room experience. But many travelers noted this strange pattern in their journals, and the coincidences were too frequent to dismiss as mere chance. Birchwood burned hot and fast. Its flames were lively and bright, and the smoke was light and almost sweet-smelling. The air carried a barely perceptible scent that reminded everyone of spring and fresh young leaves. After a birch fire, people would dream simple, everyday dreams. About work, about the road they had traveled or still needed to, about tomorrow and its worries, about ordinary meetings and conversations about nothing in particular. These dreams were calm and clear, nothing strange or frightening about them. They flowed at a measured pace, like a life that was ordinary and unremarkable. People woke up feeling rested and with a clear mind. Pine wood produced a thick, resinous smoke that hung low beneath the ceiling like a heavy veil. The smell was of forest and pine, with something ancient and primal, as if the memory of the endless taiga itself seeped into the room along with the smoke. After dreaming of pine forests, the dreams often shifted into the woods. Almost always. The forest was dense and dark, where trees stood like a wall too thick to pass through, where animal trails wound between the trunks, and where the sun occasionally pierced the canopy with sparse rays. These dreams involved hunting, wandering, searching for something important yet elusive. They were active and full of motion, people walking or running, sometimes riding, seeking something or fleeing from it. And they woke with the sensation that they had lived through a whole adventure during the night. Larch wood burned steadily and long, giving off a powerful heat that lasted for hours. Its smoke was almost odorless, transparent and subtle, as if it was burning not wood but something immaterial. After larch dreams became deep and strange, not just deep but profoundly immersive, like a person descending into the depths of consciousness where there were no stories or images, only darkness and silence, and a sense of complete dissolution into nothingness. People would wake with difficulty after such dreams, as if surfacing from the depths, initially unable to remember where they were or who they were. The immersion was so profound that waking felt like a slow return from the bottom of an ocean of awareness. Aspen wood burned poorly. It smoked heavily, crackled, and sent sparks flying. It was usually avoided if other firewood was available, but sometimes there was no choice. The smoke from aspen was acrid and unpleasant, stinging the eyes and throat. After burning aspen, people would often have restless, anxious dreams, tossing and turning, crying out in their sleep, waking multiple times during the night with a feeling that something was wrong, that some threat was lurking, even though everything around was quiet and peaceful. They would wake up exhausted, with a heavy head and the sense that they had not truly rested at all. Alderwood produced a fragrant, spicy smoke that was slightly bitter. For reasons no one could explain, it evoked nostalgia, even in those who saw alder for the first time in their lives. After alder fires, dreams would often take people back to memories, not recent ones, but long-lost fragments from childhood or youth. Old friends, forgotten places, people and events that seemed permanently lost would suddenly come to mind with startling clarity. People would see their young mother, their father long gone, or the old family house as it had been 20 or 30 years earlier. Dreams of childhood games, first love, and heartbreaks that then felt like the end of the world. Sometimes people would wake up in tears, sometimes with a bright smile, but always with that aching feeling of nostalgia and longing for a past that had vanished forever. The experienced guardians of the station understood this well, although no one could explain why it happened. They used this knowledge to care for their guests. If a traveler appeared restless, anxious, tossing about and unable to find peace, the watchers would add birch or larch wood to the fire to ensure deep, tranquil sleep, free of troubling dreams. If they saw that a person was feeling sad and suffering from loneliness, perhaps they would place an alder branch under their pillow to help them dream of something pleasant from the past, to warm their soul with memories of times when they were not alone, when loved ones were nearby. It was a small act of care, unspoken and unexplainable, simply following what experience advised. And it often worked better than one might expect, if all this was considered mere coincidence. The silence that fell after the last traveler departed and the watcher was left alone was almost deafening. Sometimes a traveler would arrive alone. Late in the evening, when it was completely dark and only the stars shone coldly in the sky, they would stay overnight by the warmth of the stove, then leave early in the morning, even before the sun rose above the horizon, either because they were in a hurry or because the journey ahead was long and every hour of daylight needed to be used, especially in winter when daylight was so scarce. At the station, only the watcher and his family would remain, if he had a family, or sometimes just himself if he lived alone, without a wife or children, which was not as rare as one might think. Not all women agreed to live in such remote solitude, far from other people, surrounded only by snow, forest, and the seldom passing road. The silence that followed a guest's departure was special, almost ringing. It felt as if the air in the room thickened and grew denser from this sudden loneliness. The room still held the warmth of the extra body that had slept there. The air was slightly warmer than usual when the watcher slept alone. A dent could still be seen on the sheepskin mattress where the person had lain. Their weight had left a mark that slowly smoothed out over time. On the table stood a mug from which they had sipped tea before setting out. On the bench lay a forgotten scrap of cloth or some piece of rope, small things that the traveler hadn't noticed in their hurried packing in the early morning. But the person was no longer there. They had left for the white expanse, into the cold that today was especially fierce, into the unknown road where anything could happen. A sudden snowstorm, a sled breakage, an encounter with wolves or bandits, or simply exhaustion that would knock someone off their feet in the most inconvenient place. And the watcher stood by the small window, watching as the sleighs disappeared behind a bend or over a hill, dissolving into the whiteness of the snow. It was impossible to tell where the sleighs were, or if it was just the play of light and shadow on the snow. He remained standing for several more minutes, silently, motionless. He watched the empty road stretching toward the horizon, a white ribbon of endlessness. What was he thinking at that moment? Perhaps whether he would see that person again. Would they reach the next station 30 miles away, or freeze somewhere halfway if a storm suddenly struck, or if something happened to the horses? Maybe he was recalling the conversation from the night before by the stove, the words that the traveler had spoken about their life, about the reasons they traveled where they did, about hopes and fears, or simply feeling the emptiness that always comes after the presence of a human being. Even if the person was a stranger, even if they had only spent one night together, the presence of another living creature fills the space in an invisible way. And when that presence disappears, the emptiness feels sharper than if no one had been there from the beginning. Then the watcher would step away from the window, begin his usual chores, cleaning the room, sweeping the floor, adjusting the sheepskins on the beds, adding wood to the stove, even though there was no need to keep the fire burning when he was alone. He would gather the remnants of breakfast from the table, wash the dishes with cold water from a bucket, and chop firewood if necessary, or check on the horses in the barn. Sometimes he would clear snow from the porch if it had fallen overnight. There was always work to be done. Work at the station never ended, especially in winter, when every day meant fighting the cold and snow, making sure nothing froze, broke, or fell out of order. But in the evening, when the early twilight arrived and it was time to light the lamp before the icon, or when he lay down on his pallet by the stove to sleep, the station keeper sometimes found himself thinking about that traveler from the morning. Had he made it? Where was he sleeping now? Which station had he stopped at? Was he even alive? It wasn't from sentimentality, nor from a special attachment to the person he saw once and would probably never see again. It was a sense of responsibility that all good station keepers shared. Every traveler who spent a night at your station, every person you fed and kept warm, became for a brief time under your care. And he wanted to know that this care hadn't been in vain, that the man had reached his destination, survived, and continued on his way. And so the station keeper would fall asleep with that thought. Sometimes he would dream of that traveler, walking along the road, sitting by the stove at another station, or meeting someone in the town he was headed to. Whether these were just dreams or reflections of anxiety, nobody knew. But station keepers believed that if a person appeared in their dreams alive and well, it meant everything was all right with him, that the road was watching over him. Then they could breathe a little easier and sleep peacefully, free of worry. The way Teamsters slept and their particular habits was different altogether. These drivers were a truly unique people, unlike the travelers they transported or the station keepers where they stopped. For them, the road was a perpetual trial, something to endure to reach from point A to point B. It was a constant way of life, a mode of existence, a profession that dictated everything: the daily routine, habits, health, even character and worldview. They slept in their own way, not like others, because they had learned to sleep under conditions that would seem unbearable to most. The sleeping places at stations were allocated according to an unwritten hierarchy, as I have mentioned, and Teamsters always got the worst spots. Not warm chambers, and not benches along the walls, but simply the floor. Just cold planks close to the wall farthest from the stove, where the temperature might be around 10 degrees Celsius at best. No one protested or complained. That was the order. Everyone understood and accepted it. They spread their sheepskin coats directly on the boards, while some didn't bother at all, just laid down as they were. They said it was better that way, because sleeping on a soft surface causes the back to ache, whereas on the hard ground, you get used to it. Then, even if you sleep on the ground, you don't feel the difference. They never took off their felt boots. They slept right in them, because if you took them off, they would cool down by morning, and putting cold feet into them would be agonizing. Better to leave them on and keep the body heat. The fur hats were never removed either. They pulled them down over their ears more tightly, because ears are the first to freeze when it's cold, and frostbite is easy to get. They placed their mittens on their chests under the sheepskin coat so as not to lose them, and so they would be warm by morning, not icy. They fell asleep in this gear, ready to jump up and run outside at any moment if something happened, if someone called, or if they needed to quickly harness the horses and ride on. The Teamsters would fall asleep instantly, in less than a minute. They lay down, closed their eyes, and were already asleep. They even snored loudly and often, as only Teamsters know how to snore. Sometimes the station keepers would ask the drivers to be quieter if important guests were present who complained about the noise. The secret to their ability to fall asleep instantly lay in the exhaustion accumulated throughout the day. An entire day spent in the freezing cold, on the runners of the sleds, under the relentless wind that slapped against their faces, shaking them at every bump. Hands went numb holding the reins, legs stiff from stillness and cold, and their backs ached from constant tension. By evening, their bodies demanded one thing above all else: immediate, deep rest. And it didn't matter where they were, what they lay on, or the conditions they faced. The only thing that mattered was lying horizontally and being able to shut down consciousness for at least a few hours. Dreams rarely visited their faces, or perhaps they simply forgot them, which was essentially the same. They would say, "We sleep as if we're passing out, complete darkness, a fall, nothing remembered." And then it's morning. Perhaps that was exactly how it was. Maybe the body, drained after a day's work, simply shut down the dreams, like an unnecessary function of the brain, to conserve energy. All resources went into healing the exhausted body, into deep, restorative sleep without any dreams. But sometimes, old Teamsters would say, they would dream of the road, the same road, white and endless, and they'd be driving along it, carrying someone. They wouldn't see who, but they'd know they were transporting someone. And the road never seemed to end. You'd keep driving, endlessly, and you'd wake up feeling as if you hadn't slept at all, but had just kept working through the night. Life for the Teamsters was like that, the road by day and the road by night. In reality and in dreams, there was almost no difference. Everything flowed into one endless movement across the white expanse, from station to station, from city to city, from one point to another that became the departure point for the next journey. And they fell asleep with this knowledge, with this acceptance of their fate. No rebellion, no complaints. That's just how it was. Such was the life they chose, or perhaps life chose them. And there was nothing to do about it. You simply had to live, to keep moving, to sleep when you could, and then move again. Before sleep, most prayed. Their faith was simple. It was a religious time. Faith was woven into daily life, not something reserved for Sunday services, but a constant background to existence. Nearly everyone prayed before sleeping. Some whispered their prayers softly, so as not to disturb others. Some muttered silently, with only their lips moving. Others simply repeated familiar words in their minds, words from childhood. The prayers were usually short, not long church services read aloud for hours, but simple human appeals to God with the most basic requests. Save us, carry us through the night, wake us up healthy and alive, give strength for the journey ahead, protect us on the road, bring us home when the time comes. They crossed themselves 3 times, wide and sweeping, as the old-timers taught. Right hand from forehead to chest, then from right shoulder to left, kissing the cross if they had one, or just placing their hand on their heart. They looked at the icon in the corner where a small lamp flickered, its flame trembling at the slightest movement of the air. And something in that tiny flame was calming, a reminder that there was something greater than this night, greater than the cold road itself. There was some meaning, some order in a world that often seemed chaotic and cruel. Faith gave many people something vital. Not everyone, of course. Some didn't believe, or lost their faith after some heavy trial. But for most, faith offered a feeling that they were not alone in this cold, indifferent world, that someone up above was watching over them, protecting them, guiding their steps. If disaster strikes, it's not merely a cruel coincidence, but part of some larger plan that you don't fully understand, yet makes sense within the grander scheme of existence. Perhaps it's an illusion, or self-deception, or simply a psychological shield against the terror of life's absurdity. But an illusion that helps survive the night, allows you to wake up in the morning and keep moving forward. At that point, it ceases to be just an illusion. It becomes a tool for survival. And at a winter station deep in Siberia, where daily survival was an ongoing challenge, such a tool was essential. Atheists were also among those who passed through, though less frequently. These free thinkers were diverse, educated individuals who read forbidden books and pondered the universe through scientific categories rather than religious beliefs. Or they were simply those who had lost faith after the death of loved ones, or after experiencing injustice and suffering. They didn't pray before sleeping. They just lay down and closed their eyes. They tried not to think about death, about the pointlessness, about the cold that never seemed to end, about the emptiness awaiting after the final breath. They fell asleep more heavily, often lying awake longer, staring into the darkness of the ceiling, tossing and turning. Unable to find a comfortable position, they would wake up in the early hours with a strange, unexplainable anxiety, feeling that something was wrong, missing. On the stations, neither the believers nor the skeptics were judged. Everyone coped with fear and loneliness as best they could. The station keepers understood that what mattered wasn't the words of prayer or religious rituals, but the ability of a person to fall asleep, rest, and wake up in the morning ready to continue the journey. If faith helps, pray as much as you like. If it doesn't, there's no need to pretend. It's better to just lie quietly and try to calm the mind with any method that works for you. Tolerance wasn't based on some liberal ideology, but on a practical understanding that people are different, and what works for one might not work for another. There's no point in forcing everyone onto a single path when many roads lead to survival, and each person chooses their own. There are stories of those who froze in their sleep, terrified by the extinguished stove. But there were also tragedies at the stations. Not often, thank goodness, but they did happen. And the most terrifying of all was when the stove went out during the night for some reason, and people froze in their sleep, without waking, without understanding what was happening, simply falling asleep in warmth and not waking up in the morning because there was no heat anymore. The causes varied. Firewood ran out, and no one was around to add more because the station keeper had fallen into a deep sleep, or was sick, or drunk. Or perhaps the draft in the stove had stopped due to snow clogging the chimney during a blizzard. Or maybe a simple mistake, an oversight that cost lives. The temperature in the room would plummet rapidly once the stove ceased to give off heat, dropping from about 20 degrees Celsius to 0 in an hour. And within 2 hours, the inside temperature would fall below 10 degrees Celsius, continuing to drop until it matched the outside cold. People would wake first from the cold, but not immediately. The sleep was deep after the long journey and exhaustion. The body resisted waking, the brain clinging to sleep as if it were a refuge. The sleepers tossed and turned, pulling blankets closer, curling into fetal positions to preserve heat. But the cold penetrated deeper. It seeped beneath clothing, chilled the skin, slowed blood flow. And in those moments, they dreamed of walking through snow. They walked for a long time, utterly exhausted. They wanted to lie down and rest just a little. There was a snowdrift, soft and comfortable. Maybe they could lie down for a minute. Just a minute. It didn't matter. Snow, in truth, was worn if buried deep enough. They would lie down, close their eyes, and in that moment, warmth would spread through their bodies. It would almost feel like heat, even a slight fever. It was strange how the snow could feel warm and pleasant, yet still be cold enough to relax the body and ease tension. Lying down, closing the eyes, one could drift into sleep, feeling almost a glow of heat spreading through the limbs, a slight fever that made everything seem softer. But this sleep would deepen, and breathing would slow, until, at some point, it simply ceased, quietly, without pain or fear. It was a peaceful transition, a gentle crossing into nothingness, unnoticed and seamless. In the morning, they would be found by someone entering another room, or by a passing traveler who noticed something was wrong. The station master, stiff and unmoving on his cot, along with travelers frozen in their tents, on benches, or lying on the floor, everyone's face serene and peaceful, as if they were merely sleeping. Only their faces were cold, icy, unresponsive to any help. It was often said that death in sleep was a good death. The person hadn't suffered, hadn't agonized. They simply fell asleep and never woke up, passing away easily. Perhaps that was true. Maybe dying of cold in sleep wasn't as terrible as it seemed if one slipped into unconsciousness gradually. Yet, the horror still gripped those who found these bodies, because they understood that it could have been them. It could have been them lying there dead, if only the stove at their station had gone out. The station master's fault was always a reason for blame. He was removed from his position immediately. Strict punishments followed, sometimes even court-martial or exile for gross negligence. Because the station master's primary duty was crystal clear: to ensure that the stove never went out, under any circumstances. It was a sacred, unbreakable rule of the station. As long as the stove burned, life persisted. People remained safe and alive. Morning would come, and everyone would wake up, breathing and moving. But if the stove went out, death arrived silently, inevitably, and nothing could stop it. No amount of sheepskin coats or fur blankets could protect against the penetrating cold that turned the station into a freezer. After such tragedies, new rules were introduced. A mandatory night duty, when someone had to stay awake and monitor the stove, check every hour for fresh firewood, ensure the chimney wasn't clogged, and that draft wasn't pulling the heat away. Sometimes primitive alarms were set, simple devices that would wake the station keeper if the temperature dropped or if the fire went out, allowing them to check and react. They would drill every new station master repeatedly. The stove must never go out. It's the law, the fundamental truth. It's the only thing standing between life and death in Siberian winter. If you can't follow this law, find another job, because your negligence will kill people. Those who survived the terror of the journey and the brush with death remembered how they'd woken up in the middle of the night, trembling with fear, after the worst encounters with mortality. Sometimes the station would bring in people who had miraculously survived the most direct and brutal forms of death. Lost in a blizzard, wandering the white emptiness for hours, unable to see beyond an outstretched hand, or who had fallen through the ice on a river crossing and barely managed to escape the freezing water, or simply got stuck deep in snow when their sleds overturned and the horses could not move. They sat in the cold for hours, the slow chill sapping life from their fingers and toes first, then ascending upward through their limbs. They were delivered barely alive, blue with cold, often unconscious. Their bodies were so frozen and stiff that their joints refused to bend, requiring them to be laid flat on the floor in front of the stove, carefully and quickly warmed. Acting swiftly was crucial, but also delicate. Improper warming could kill faster than the cold itself. First, the victims were moved into the shed, not immediately into warmth. They were left to acclimate gradually to the changing temperature. Their clothes were removed swiftly, freezing and stiff, and the body was exposed to the transitional warmth, allowing it to adjust slowly before being fully warmed. Every step had to be performed with care and precision, because in these moments, the difference between life and death hinged on the smallest mistake. They had become like a shell of ice, their bodies rubbed with snow, not warm water, but snow itself, because the sudden temperature change could trigger shock, potentially stopping the heart. They vigorously rubbed every part of the body, arms, legs, chest, back, until the skin began to turn red and blood circulation started to return, even just a little, until the fingers started to twitch and the eyelids trembled, signaling that the person was coming back to life. Then they were carried into the room, but not directly to the stove, instead further away. They were wrapped in dry, warm sheepskin blankets, placed so that the head was slightly higher than the body to promote better blood flow to the brain. They were given warm tea, never hot, but warm, carefully, slowly, every 5 to 10 minutes, watching closely to prevent choking, since the swallowing reflex was not yet fully restored. The rescuers waited to see if the person would fully regain consciousness and survive, or if the body would give up and refuse to fight further. An even chance, 50-50. Those who managed to come back from the brink, who triumphed over death in this struggle, often fell into a deep sleep afterward, lasting a day or even 2. The sleep was strange, almost like a coma. The body entered a mode of intense recovery, fighting to repair damage, to heal tissues that had begun to die from the cold. They lay motionless, breathing barely perceptible, with only a weak but steady pulse indicating life. The heart stubbornly kept beating, refusing to surrender. Awakening was gradual. First, they shifted slightly, then opened their eyes and shut them again. Eventually, they would open their eyes fully and look around with unfocused, bewildered gazes, not understanding where they were, what had happened, how they had ended up here, or how much time had passed. They often had no memory of how they had been saved, brought to the station, who rubbed them with snow, or who fed them tea. Their memory cut out at the moment when things turned truly dire, when the cold had penetrated so deeply that the brain began to shut down. The next thing they remembered was waking up in the warmth of the station, unsure how they got there. They looked around with an expression of someone who couldn't believe they were alive, that it was over, that the nightmare had ended, and finally they could breathe again. Then tears would start to flow. Many began to cry quietly, almost silently. Tears just streamed down their frozen, aching cheeks. It was impossible to tell whether these tears were of relief, gratitude, or simply a bodily reaction to the trauma endured. Perhaps all of these combined. Recovery was slow, taking weeks. Frostbite healed gradually, often resulting in the loss of a few toes or fingers in the best cases. In worse situations, entire feet or hands would turn black and die, requiring amputation. Strength returned gradually as well. At first, they couldn't even get out of bed. Then they managed to stand, though walking was difficult. Over time, they could walk, but fatigue came quickly. Yet, beyond the physical injuries, the greatest terror was the fear that settled deep within the soul and never truly left. Sleep after such an ordeal was restless for months. They would dream of snowstorms, cold, and a sense of being lost. They woke up soaked in sweat and silent screams, gasping for air as if suffocating. The station keeper would come, hearing the distress, and offer water, speaking simple words. "You're here. You're safe. It was only a dream. Everything is fine. Everything has passed. Morning will come soon." Gradually, the person would calm down, understanding where they were, what had happened, and that the nightmare belonged to the past. They would fall asleep again, but not as deeply, always alert, ready to wake at any moment if something seemed threatening. Yet the scars of those nights remained for a lifetime. Those who had come face to face with death from cold always feared snowstorms afterward, never letting go of that dread. Refusing to set out on the road, even if the weather was slightly questionable, they preferred to stay at the station for days or weeks, waiting for conditions to improve. No urgent matter could persuade them to risk it. Once again, the body's memory proved stronger than the mind. The body remembered that terror on a cellular level and refused to obey when the mind insisted it was necessary to go, that important affairs awaited, that delaying was impossible. The body said no. Absolutely no. It's better to lose money and reputation than to risk life. Better to be late for a meeting than never to arrive at all. Better to be branded a coward than to end up frozen, dead in a snowdrift. People listened to their bodies because they knew. You can't fool the body. It knows the truth. If the body signals danger, it truly is dangerous, and it's wiser to be cautious. Thank you for watching Lectures Under the Moon. I'm Daniel Hayes. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories.